everyone, and welcome to our talk today, Can Storytelling and Hypercasual Coexist? Thank you, Hypercasual Game Conference, for hosting me and letting me tell the story of narrative design and hypercasual games. Let's get going. Normally, when we are asking players what they feel about the narrative design of a game, they normally complain about the cutscenes, right? It's always where we are idle, or it's boring, we just wait for it to end. It's just like watching a movie. It takes us out of the suspension of disbelief for the game. Sometimes it's just boring and tedious, reading through mounds and mounds of text or just skipping over them, where we are all only interested in scratching the upper layer of the game and the storyline. Most of the time, players feel like it's slowing the pace of the game, where we just want to advance and get to the nitty-gritty. Too many details, so much time we need to invest in order to explore the narrative. For some, it's an adventure. For some, it's a burden. And we just try to move forward and forward. But that's just part of the truth, right? Because narrative design and storyline and storytelling can be so much more than that. Let's start with who am I? So I'm Tsahi Liberman. I'm based in Israel. I've been quite some time in the gaming industry, locally and globally. I actually started my way in games working on EdTech with television and children IP sector. I work with Sesame Street and Disney, PBS Kids, Nickelodeon, and other big brands for children, and was dealing mainly with educational games on all platforms. Then I moved to other types of platforms and games. And since then, in the last several years, I'm dealing with hyper-casual games, hybrid casual games. I built single-handedly dozens of teams globally, distributed teams that developed hyper-casual games of many genres. And currently, I'm working with the lovely studio Lightneer, which is based in Finland, as their head of game design and data insights. A little bit about Lightneer as a studio. So our mission, as stated here, is to create fun and snackable mobile games made by curious and happy people. Culture is something that is very important for us, and we try very hard to maintain our values. As mentioned, we are a super experienced team. Each one of us came with loads of experience in developing games, not just hyper-casual, but also casual games. And we learn each day more and more towards success. We already had several hits that we done with top 5 publishers, and we are extremely proud of that. Over 75 million game downloads so far, and we are growing and hiring all the time. As mentioned, we're based in Helsinki. I'm working from Israel with the teams, and it's quite amazing, I might say. Another game we are supposed to be globally launching during this October is Slice Disc 3D, which is an interesting concept that we developed over the last several months. So fingers crossed. Let's get into the details. Why storytelling is so important even? Why do we care? So in-game storytelling contributes to our game and to our players, turning them into more immersive in the storyline, make them understand the world. Why is the world designed as it is? What's the relationships between the characters, between the different statuses in the world? We have to understand the storyline, and narrative design and storytelling help us do that. Storytelling is also facilitating skills that we learn and hone during our gameplay, whether it's an educational game or a multiplayer game where we interact with other characters. We develop our own skills, both in-game and out of the game world. And secondly, we learn a lot about, our choices in the game world and outside of it, and our relationship with game characters, and reflect that sometimes on our relationships outside of the game. So it is meaningful and specifically effective in hyper-casual games is the minimalistic storytelling approach. Speaking about minimalistic storytelling is a method that involved actually very little to nothing implemented by the narrative designer as hints placed in the environment, as characters designed in a way that tell us more where they came from, why they do what they do, but the purpose of the game and the different interactions between the different sides of the game. It's something that is interesting and, in short, involves information given in ways other than dialogue. No text. We can do that only by designing the environment, as mentioned, the design of the enemies, and hints we planned over the different terrains. Let's see some example of games and media that utilize that specific minimalistic approach. The first game we'll speak about is Journey. Journey is an interesting game where it's telling a story with no dialogues at all. It was developed by that game company, by Genova Chen, the same guy that developed Flowers, same concept or very similar concept. The game doesn't explain us anything about the world, anything about what's our mission over there. It's very quiet, it's very soothing, yet we are starting to imagine what our purpose in the game world. We're starting to build ourselves our own storyline. And additionally, we are always coupled with another person randomly, and we have to communicate with that person. But how can we communicate with no dialogues? That's a challenge in a game that speaks about relationships, that speaks about exploration, and let us almost in a meditative way to try and explore our mind and give us the reasons why are we playing the game, what's the purpose, where are we going. Another game is Portal. Portal as well doesn't really lay a very elaborate story for the world. We don't see any mounts of text. We don't see any exposition, just the interaction we have between the unseen GLaDOS to the environment. We also get hints along the way about the AI trying to kill us, about different attachment to the companion cube we have, and different hints we encounter along the levels planted there by prisoners or scientists. So in a way, the environment design build the story for us and we complete it in our minds. No need for so much of a dialogue or dialogue tree. Another good example is the comics, physical comics. Yes, there are things like that still in our world. Not everything is digital. Comics made by Ricardo Delgado, Age of Reptiles, Tribal Wars. That has been created in the 90s, 1996 to be exact. And that tells a story, very cruel, very vicious, story of survival in the age of dinosaurs, story of an age with no words, before language. The entire comics don't have even one word to express, the world and its lore. It speaks through the beast roaming the land, fighting each other through different expression of the face, through different battle scenes. Reading through that comics teach you a lot about creating a narrative, creating a storyline with no words at all. It's a good example for doing just that. Another interesting game, which is based on choices or specifically decisions that we make, is Reigns, Her Majesty. In the game, we are trying politically to survive. We have to try and satisfy everyone. But this is an impossible task. We would never satisfy everyone. We will always disappoint someone. And as we do that, we have to keep the balance between the different sects or sides in the political field. The story is based on my choices. I'm swiping right or left, and that changes my decision and affects the entire stats that you see on the top screen. The texts here are easily read, very short, very concise. Specifically, my decisions, reading those 2 or 3 lines above and deciding quickly what will be my tactic. That's a good example. Another good game that also affects how we feel is Papers, Please. Papers, Please speak the story of a border inspector going to work every day, where he have to decide whether to accept, whether to approve, or to deny the entrance of immigrants trying to cross the border. That inspector is facing each time with a very hard situation. Those immigrants, sometimes their life depends on crossing that border. And secondly, you get several documents that indicate who is that person. So oftentimes you try to turn to the stigmatic decision. And this is interesting to see how players go through this game, knowing that every wrong decision can deduct salary from that border inspector life, which also has a family that he has to maintain. So sometimes it's a cold-hearted decision and judgment of who is entering and who is not. There's a quota, there's a way to approve. And of course, sometimes we are being very cruel and very stigmatic towards what we see in the document. So this is a game which is a great judgment of character. Again, no story about the world, or at least no elaborate story about the world that we are living in. Not much about me as a person. No elaborate dialogue trees that last forever. So speaking about that and seeing several examples of non-hyper-casual games using narrative, specifically minimalistic storytelling, let's have a look about good narrative design in hyper-casual games. So firstly, a large part of the narrative-driven hyper-casual games are defined by their humoristic, absurdic, or ridicule status. They try to approach different aspects of life, whether it's work, whether it's pregnancy, whether it's courtroom, in a very humoristic way, and try to divide it into several activities. We see that in most of the games that are narrative-driven. Most of the levels are very varied with different mini activities, mini mechanics, normally the leading mechanics. And it's interesting to pass through those variety of levels and expect what's going to happen. Well, actually, most of the time it's just looping over a few dozen levels over and over again, but that's another story. Another characteristic is letting the player decide. Just like in Reigns, we have to decide normally between 2 options. What will divert or change our storyline here? And in most hyper-casual games, the effect is not that massive. Whether we choose option A or option B, most of the times, nothing will change drastically. Yes, we will get another angle of that storyline, but since it's not in-depth, we will eventually reach most of the same decisions or outcomes. Another aspect of narrative-driven hyper-casual games is those who try to play on the empathic string. Why should I even care about that character? Why should I even save that kid from being prosecuted? Why should I even help that baby? That's something that is done really well through visuals in some cases and through animations. Another effect, and I'll end that slide with that, is the soap opera effect. Normally, when you look on those kind of games which are narrative driven, you're asking yourself, how could someone really, play that more than several days forward? And the soap opera effect is something that is, hey, I just want to be here in that game and experience that. Just like watching a soap opera. Yes, I know it's hilarious. I know it's corny. I know it's cringy, but I still want to be part of that. I want to be part of something which is not really my real life. It's something that takes that to a very radical corner of the events I experience day to day. So that's another aspect. Speaking about several examples. So the first one is artist life. In artist life, I play a female artist that is creating artworks or portraits for different characters who approach her. Most of the characters are highly stigmatized: the Black person, the Instagram influencer, the high-tech husband. And you would see in many of the choices, or a part of those, you would see that there is not so much of a difference deciding or picking just one. Whether we choose either, the result will mostly be the same. Again, here we see many mini activities diverting the storyline into counting the money I get for my artworks, sorting the colors that I use, taking a picture of the influencer or other activities. It's in times, this game is specifically, try to ridiculize stigmatic situation and clients, and of course the requests. Judge 3D is a game where we are playing a judge. We are placed in court, we are simulating a courtroom, and we get one case after another case. And of course, some of the prosecutors trying to sustain, overrule some of our decisions. We are dealing with specific relationship we have with different characters in the courtroom, like the secretary who wants to date us, and so on. But the most interesting and important thing here is the situation that we are placed in. Should we really be cold-hearted and arrest that kid that has done a crime? Or was he just hungry? Do we really need to stigmatize that Black person in that line of criminals and send him for a longer arrest, or should we let him go? Should we judge really carefully what actually the crime was, or the narrative of the crime was, and then decide? So trying to move fast from case to case, but also consider that, actually made me read some of the narratives presented to me. But then again, as you can see, and if you play the game, you know that that's only 1 or 2 lines that you have to read, and it's really quick to connect to that game. Another game which was one of my favorites is Boss Life 3D, where you play a boss of a company, and that made me, remember a different situation I had, whether as a boss or as an employee in different companies, and seeing that situation replicated in the game, of course, ridiculed to the other extent, but then many mini activities which are fun and quick. It loops around, but it's still fun to play them. And taking that to the extent of deciding who to fire, whether that person who drinks in the office, whether that person who steals something. And there's even an examination very closely of sexual harassment in the office, and we need to decide what to do with that. And in that case, that was interesting to see how such a delicate thing was dealt with in the game. Again, not perfect, but for the hyper casual games that needs to, maintain a small depth of narrative in a game and continue from level to level. That was done not bad at all. My only complaint is that in times it felt to me like it was overly cruel in several decisions that we made. The next game I want to showcase is Baby Life 3D. Fun game where, as a father, I related to some of the situation described here. We play a female character that is finding out that she's pregnant, and the entire process is moving on to her pregnancy, giving birth, and dealing with being a parent once and for all. And of course, cheesy situations. In most of the games that I showed, again, the texts are very short, very concise. And here, that was very enjoyable because the animation were good, and it was actually partly hilarious, you know, watching it and imagining myself in different situations of life. So yes, those hyper-casual games relate to our day-to-day activities, as many other games are doing in the hyper-casual industry, but this game was specifically funny. Another game that I will end with is Streamer Life. So what I liked in the game is that first we play a female streamer, you know, following that Twitch female streamers and you know, the ASMR or bath streams that also touch very little bit on the aspects of how difficult it is and how it's actually set up, but the simulation of different comments that are being scrolled or different aspect of setup to move forward and improve my room and buy new setup for that. That was actually very well done. At times, I felt like, as a male person playing that character, I felt it's overly sexist and over the top. I tried to read the entire comments that were scrolling around, and some of them were repeated over and over in not enough gap. But essentially, that was an interesting game to play and experience just a little bit the life of a female character and moving between different levels of the game. So what about the future? Speaking about narrative-driven game and minimalistic methods and storytelling, what do I think about the future of those games? What can be done in order to make them better? So maybe I would expect a more reasonable choices. In some of the games that I played, I stumbled upon choices like yes and of course in the same page, in the same situations. So if we already bother to write narrative, let's do something that is reasonable. It can be humoristic, could be ecstatic, but let's work on that copy to be reasonable to the player and be distinct between those two choices, and also try to create an effect that differentiate one choice to the other. Another suggestion is something that I play with in my mind is when I play most of those games, I normally play as one character. I see the world from most of the time, most of the levels, I see the world from one character point of view. And I would love to replay those same levels from another character point of view. Of course, it takes longer time to develop, create more narratives and more art, doing that flip of a point of view, but that may, contribute to retention. Another aspect that I would love to see is not just those games which are gathering different mini activities and mini mechanics, but also see the same narrative or similar narratives implemented in other genres, which are not too common to include that narrative design, like runners, like puzzles, like other simulations of activities in our world. That would be refreshing. What if we, like Braid by Jonathan Blow, could actually unlock back in time feature and can rewind our decisions, what we just did in the level backwards, would that be monetized well? Would that make sense? Would that affect the balance of the game? That's something to think about when we are developing those games. Or is it too short as a level to do a back in time feature? That's also an option. As mentioned, most of the games that I played, after 20, 30, 50 levels, it starts to loop. And I don't really mind that it's looping because it's a huge amount of investment in different mini activities and mini mechanics and art, but we can use the same situation, but with other characters, with other scenes, with other crises or fiascos. And in some games, it's done in part of the levels, but most of the games don't use that. And I feel like after 30 levels or 40 levels, I play the game over and over again, and it's become boring. So let's try to tell a different side of storytelling, different side of our narrative through those repeated bunch of levels. And as any game developer or game designer, I would love to find or implement more Easter eggs that I can reveal as a side quest that exposed after a specific combination of choices that I made throughout the game. I would like to see that popped up, and probably would love to pay for it just to reveal another quest or another storyline that I can expose that fork out of the main storyline as a side quest. That could be interesting. That's our time for questions. So it was a pleasure speaking to you guys. And if you have any question, if you have any clarification, you can find me on LinkedIn. And I want to thank you for listening to me and being so patient. Thank you very much. And thank you, Hypercasual Game Conference, for the hosting. Bye-bye.